had some discussions early on about how this is kind of an interesting topic for a lot of people, and it's been hanging out there for a while. And as new books get printed, it comes up again and again. There are a lot of things that people are not aware of, like the background of how things get done and so on and so forth, how decisions are made. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started with your presentation.
Okay, I hope so. Let's see. Let me see if I can successfully share this screen.
Word's a little out of practice here.
Yeah.
There you go.
Is it there? Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can.
From Meher Baba's Last Will and Testament, right? Is that what you're seeing?
That's what we're seeing.
Okay. All righty. Well, I'm talking about here the approach to Baba's words that has been adopted as, you know, part of its official policy by the Avatar Meher Baba Trust. There's really an enormous amount to be said about this whole subject. So here I can only just bring up certain central points. But the approach that the Trust has adopted centers on a whole branch of literary studies called textual scholarship. It's very ancient. It goes all the way back to Aristarchus of Samothrace back in the 3rd century BC with the texts of Homer and so forth. In the last 2-3 centuries, it's been enormously developed. That was my own background was as a medieval professor, so I got a certain amount of training in this. And textual scholarship really has been the basis that has been used by the Trust for the answering these questions. What can we reasonably take to be Meher Baba's words? There are all sorts of very deep philosophical aspects to this whole question. But let me begin by looking at some of the Meher Baba's Last Will and Testament. And now I'm not in a place where I'm getting the right kind of screen. But anyway, you know, I'm not getting, let me see. Okay, hide presenter view. Show presenter view. Okay, yeah, I think I can now. You may know Baba did in fact sign his last will and testament in 1967, and half of it deals with the topic of copyrights. And what copyrights are the intellectual property produced by acts of authorship. That is what it explicitly is. So when he's talking about his copyrights, he's talking about works of his own authorship. So I wanted to read the most important pertinent clause here, which is number 4. Baba says, accepting such copyrights as may have been specifically transferred by me during my physical lifetime, as has already been done by me in respect of my copyrights for my works. God speaks. Can you still see that? Is it still visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Listen, humanity, life at its best, and beams on the spiritual panorama by Meher Baba. So these are all separate questions with their own long histories. I'm not going to go into those. Which copyrights have permanently been gifted by me to the Sufism Reoriented Incorporation of California, USA. And this is the clause I wanted to focus on. I own copyrights in all my literary works, direct and indirect, published and unpublished, including, and now we get a list, not of literary works, but of literary genres, including my sayings, poems, messages, articles, discourses, books, charts, maps, etc. And then he also mentions copyrights that could be gifted to him by his lovers in the future. So the a really important point that is raised here, I own the copyrights in all my literary works, direct and indirect, published and unpublished. So Baba is very clearly identifying as his literary works, not only those things which were published, but those things which have not been. And also the phrase direct and indirect. If we are to presume that Baba was saying something, meaning to actually communicate to people here, part of what this would have to cover would be in the category of indirect, let us say, words of his and messages and discourses recorded in things like diaries, such as Chanji's diaries. So the trust has understood this to be a clause applying to things that were published and things that were not, and things that can be found in diaries. And Baba is calling them my literary, my copyrights. I own the copyrights in my literary works. Now, the trust has drawn a fundamental distinction within all this stuff between two categories of things, two categories of literary works. And one would be those which we're calling his published works and his unpublished works. Those get treated differently under trust editorial policy. So Baba's published works we construe as satisfying these three criteria. Let me see, I think I have them written out here. I have all this other stuff. Okay, let's just skip this for the moment. But the three criteria are these: books and messages and discourses that were published, 1, during Meher Baba's lifetime, 2, with his evident knowledge and approval, and 3, with his name on them as author. An example would be God Speaks. I mean, published during his lifetime with his evident knowledge and approval, and his byline by Meher Baba. Or Discourses would be another one. So these would be the basic books that most of us became acquainted with, like in my case, back in 1970 when I first came to Baba. The second category includes unpublished and or indirect works of his that do not satisfy all three of those criteria. If they don't satisfy all three, they are in that category of unpublished and indirect. Now, these two categories of material get treated very differently under trust editorial policy. The Baba's published words, things that he himself got published during his lifetime with his knowledge and approval and name on them as author, are basically to be left alone. So an example would be, okay, in the case of Discourses, a republication of it would not re-edit it, not revise it. Now, there are minor exceptions to this, and that would extend to accidentals like misspellings or subject-verb agreement problems if they crop up, or incorrect punctuation, like if a book uses double quotations and there's an instance where it uses a single quotation, well, then it's brought into conformity with general practice. We're talking about things like that, not matters that are accidentals and non-essentials. Those things can be corrected. Or here'd be another example. Let's say in a discourse it says table such and such on page 169. but in a new reflowing of the text, it's 182. Well, obviously, you don't keep an old page number that doesn't pertain to the current edition. Those are the sorts of allowable changes, editorial changes in the primary text of Baba's words. In other words, it's to be left alone. And the philosophy is that Baba himself got this work done during his physical lifetime. And so that's it. He's the author, and this was how he chose to have it published. There can be mistakes in it. There certainly are in certain books, but we're not going to change them. The second category of unpublished things would extend to things like Infinite Intelligence or Tiffin Lectures or Creation and Its Causes, other things like that, that are based on, in those cases, diaries. Here there are three standards, three criteria that are brought to bear in the creation of what is called critical editions. This is not a very friendly term, and I wish the standard term were another one, but this is the standard term used in textual scholarship, a critical edition. And the Trust editorial policy calls specifically for the publication of Baba's unpublished words as critical editions. And they have to satisfy these three criteria, which you can see in what I put up there. First, it has to be based on an exhaustive study of all relevant sources, documentary and other. And this is an enormous job. In the case of Tiffin Lectures, for example, it probably took me 7 or 8 years just to do this one part, working most of the time on it. 2, editorial principles that are consistent and objective, and editorial practices attuned to the kind of editing Baba wanted. Okay, I'm going to say more about that in a minute. And number 3, transparency in these matters through instruments of disclosure within the edition itself. That would include, for example, endnotes or discursive appendices or essays reviewing source materials, explaining what they are. Also, okay, I have more to say about that. Okay, the first, all relevant sources need to be located and studied. These include not only sources for the text itself, but relevant historical and biographical background material. In the case of Creation and Its Causes, for example, there are many massive diaries by Chanji covering the period, many of which give information very relevant to the talks that are being published there. Also, there are published books, Sobs and Throbs by Ramju, a book by Rausab, a book by Dastur, and so forth. So all of this stuff needs to be identified and studied and brought into the editorial process. And may I say, like in the case of Tiffin Lectures, it took years and years to find it. I mean, there was no list in advance that somebody had come up with of all the relevant sources. So it had to be found. I had to spend really years going through Chanji's diary. A lot of it was in Gujarati. I had to figure out what was relevant, get it translated, and bring all the relevant passages to bear on the text of Tiffin Lectures. So this is quite an enormous job. It's a major textual scholarship is entailed. Okay, the editing of the text, editorial principles need to be clear, consistent, and comparatively objective. It can't simply be highly subjective interpretations by an editor. The principles used need to be quite objectively visible within the text itself, and something that others can identify and respond to. Editorial practice needs to attune itself to the kind of editing Meher Baba wanted. This can be ascertained by ascertained A, by his comments on the subject, and B, by the evidence of how he actually got his books edited during his lifetime. So in a minute, I'm going to read you a quote of some of the things Bob actually said about editing. And third, transparency in these matters through instruments of disclosure within the edition itself, and also, may I say, online. On the Trust website, the source materials are getting published. Readers need a way of learning about textual sources and editorial practices so that they can assess for themselves the authenticity of the text. This can be compared to honest business practices that include making financial information public and conducting audits. Now, let me read to you, here's one of Baba's comments about how his discourses should be edited. This was in the Combined Diary, 7th August 1927. That's one of the most important diary from this period. And during this time, the Tiffin Lectures were coming to an end. Probably Infinite Intelligence got handwritten during this period also. And we have a number of other major works that were all getting finished. There was a big sea change happening at Mehrabad right at the end of August. And it looks like the Mandali were finishing up a lot of these old manuscripts. So here's what Baba said here in the Combined Diary. He said, "No, it is not advisable to send my notes and lectures for composition to anyone who is away from me." The writer, they had been talking about sending some of the records of his discourses to some famous writer in India and having him do it. And Baba's saying, no, that's not good. The writer must be here in order to ensure correctness. For example, K.J. Dastur, he became the editor of the Mirror Message, took note of certain explanations of mine in writing the other day. Yet while putting the same in his own language, he made a mess of it all. And this is the key sentence. My explanations may be recomposed in forceful and stylish language, but the spirit and meaning must remain unchanged. Let me read that again. My explanations may be recomposed in forceful and stylish language, but the spirit and meaning must remain unchanged. Such a writer will come in the course of time. Dasturji writes well, but his uncompromising tone and terms are likely to offend some communities. And then he talks about his book. The big book that I have written will be the future Bible, Quran, Avesta, and Veda, as it will be universally accepted by all castes and creeds. I have left use of the pen and stopped writing anything after finishing this great work. Hence, it has force. Here's another comment that Baba made to Francis Brabazon. Baba asked Francis to re-edit God Speaks. Francis never finished that, but it was something Baba wanted him to do. So this is the note that Francis took down from Baba's dictation. In the revised edition of God Speaks, the present introduction is to be A, and another introduction, B, is to be written by Francis, in which he will say that Meher Baba directed him to re-edit God Speaks without changing the facts. Now, it so happens that in the Avatar's Abode archives, they have, 15 or 20 handwritten pages in Francis's handwriting of re-editing of God Speaks that he did. And in a letter to Ivy Deuce several years later, he mentions this and said that Baba liked it. So this would give us an example of the kind of editing that Baba wanted. And may I say that Francis didn't change the facts. The content, the substance of it is really the same. It just reads more fluently and more poetically. That was my assessment of it. So these are the fundamental policies. By the way, here's the copy of what I just read from the Combined Diary. right there. In the course of okay, I'll just have to cut this really short, but I mean, like in doing the Tiffin Lectures, literally years and years were spent by me finding all kinds of source materials in Chanji's diary behind what was the primary text. The base text was something actually kept by the Pearsons in Marana, as it turns out. That was the typed text where all the lacunae got filled in. But we have sources for that typed text in Chanji's diary, and to a very considerable extent, we can see the genesis of the text. I have, if there were more time, I could show you slides that show this, but in one example that I have right here, we have a 3 lines. In fact, I'll show it to you just to give you some idea of what we're talking about here. I think it's right here. Okay, this gives you an illustration of what some of these sources look like. Okay, right here, you can see on the left, those 3 Gujarati lines. Those appear to be Baba's original dictation. And in a whole bunch of these other pages, I could show you like all sorts of rewrites that this material went through. The first paragraph top right is the same thing we saw in the Gujarati. That got rewritten again in the last paragraph that's here, the same fundamental text. Here you see it typed up. So the point is that we can actually find the layers in the genesis of the text. And it appears from a letter that Adi wrote to Phyllis in 1955, I think, that all of this was being prepared to be given to K.J. Dastur to be written up as a book. But then he broke with Baba in 1931, so it never happened. So I do think that the Tiffin Lectures in the future, all this source material, which is all there online, gives enormous foundation for people who want to study how Baba's books came into existence. I'm very, very confident that something like the discourses came to birth in the same way, with Baba dictating and the text going through various sources. Okay, I want to bring up 2 other topics that spin off on this, bearing on the question of what are Meher Baba's words, because it's a huge question. You know, we can never forget that actually Meher Baba was silent. He didn't have any words at all. Or let's put it this way, when Baba was dictating, it would appear that Baba, like on the alphabet board, would dictate key phrases and key words to a Mandali interpreter. And the people doing this would be very skilled at reading out. And we don't have any descriptions of it, but surely it happened this way. The Van Gastern film gives us a concrete demonstration of some of it. But the Baba would dictate something, and if the Mandali knew what the second half of the thought was, let's say, or how the sentence would end, he would just say it out. And Baba might nod, yes, that's right, or things like that. So when we're going to ask the question, what were Meher Baba's words? If we just, in fact, we have a beautiful statement. I'm going to read this from Francis about this whole process. If we just had a literal transcript of what Baba dictated, it would make no sense at all in most cases, because a lot of it was accomplished by the Mandali who were giving expression to what Baba was conveying. So on one level, if you want to say what actually what were Meher Baba's actually words, one answer to this is, well, you had to be there. It was a living performance that Baba expressed. You know what Baba's gestures were like. Okay, I remember Balnatu trying to explain this to me once. And he would say, we were dealing with infinite intelligence at the time. And the word infinite comes up only about 1 billion times in the manuscript, to the point where it lost all meaning for me. But Bal was saying, when Baba would say infinite, he would make a gesture, and suddenly you would get a glimpse of, my God, the infinite, something completely beyond the categories of our experience. He would give a feeling for that. So when Baba was dictating, all of that was a part of it. There was this expressive performance. And like with these talks to the boys, I think a lot of people will get an idea of it. I think it's very evident there. He was so expressive and so beautiful that you knew what he meant. So in that sense, his words are irrecoverably lost from that point of view. However, that is not the end of the story, because Baba did want these messages, certainly in many cases, to be edited, revised, reworked, and republished. And when they were republished, Baba put his name on them. So when Baba put his name on them, that was his act as the God-man and as the author of this material. And I think we should accept it as his words. Now, how do we go between the one and the other? And this is this is really quite a big topic, and I hope I'd love to talk on this more fully. But I think this is part of the work of Meher Baba's silence. One could say, if he was God in human form, why didn't he just write out or dictate his books completely word for word, with every article and conjunction and preposition in its place, so that we have it absolutely finally and that's it? Well, I think it was part of his work not to do that. And this is the perspective that I would bring to bear on that. Way back in ancient times, like in Vedic times, the word of God, let's say, I'll take the Vedas as being the word of God, were not written at all. They were events. They were spoken. And the way that people encountered them was by hearing them as something that occurred in time. It was interactional, it was live, it occurred in time. But when writing came into the picture about 500 BC, the word of God became reified, got turned into books. This happened in most of the great traditions of the world. Look, this was my very specialization when I was a scholar. I wrote article after article on this. There's a fundamental transformation, phenomenological transformation that occurs when an event becomes a text. All of a sudden, it is all there simultaneously for your review. Something early in the book and something late at the book can be looked at sequentially, and it becomes a thing. There's huge scholarship on this subject. And may I say that I do think this was part of the work of God, the will of God, that this should have happened. We have some of the greatest masters who worked within this paradigm. One example would be Shankaracharya, minor incarnation of the Avatar, who always took the textualized versions of the Word of God. Or Ibn Arabi, another perfect matter, who responded likewise with respect to the Quran. I'm trying to present in a very short form a very big topic. But the reason I want to get to this is that I think Baba is changing us away from the scriptural reified model of what his words are. And one of the ways he's going to force this is that in the case of some of his major texts, we have multiple versions that differ from each other, all of which he approved. So if you're like, the discourses are a really good example of that. We have the original 5-volume set. We have the God to Man, Man to God, which apparently Baba read through and approved that, the 6th edition. And then after he passed away, the Mandali, Erich and Balnatu in particular were involved in. So there's much more that can be said about that. But God Speaks also, Baba wanted to have revised by Francis Brabazon in another edition. I think that this is part of the God-man's work of his silence, where he's going to force humanity not to be so obsessively quibbling on the literary surface of things. And I don't disparage the literary surface of things. I love it. This is my work. But I think he's going to force humanity to learn to read more deeply and to find the fundamental essence and not be caught in dogmatic quibbles on the surface of things. That's a very, very short statement of what I think is a huge topic. But I think that part of the complexities that we're dealing with in the text of Meher Baba's words, all of these questions are going to come up, are part of his work on consciousness to get humanity to respond to the Word of God more deeply than it has done in the past. Okay, let me read this one passage from Francis Brabazon, and I'll close with that. This is most remarkable. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I can't resist, but I do. All right, if you go on the Trust website, you'll see all sorts of manners of approach to various source materials. But let me see, where was, yeah. Okay, here's something that Francis wrote in a letter to Robert Rouse. You know, Robert Rouse was a friend of his and who lived in Avatar's abode at the time. So Francis had moved to India and was living with Baba. And, you know, Baba dictated 3 messages specifically for inclusion in Stay with God. And Francis appears to be writing explaining how this content was given out by Baba. I've never seen anything else like this, and I think it's most illuminating. So Francis wrote, he has given me some 6 pages of original material. I, of course, with the aid of Erich, had to work it all out into English words. Erich and I spent 3 or 4 whole sessions with Baba on this, with me writing and rewriting between sessions until Baba was completely satisfied. I have been employed by Baba putting other material of his into English words. This experience has shown me how almost impossible it is, even with Erich interpreting Baba's gestures and with Erich working with the one, to get Baba's say down into English words. Writing down the words that Erich speaks from Baba's gestures does not get the real sense. I think this is just magnificent. I'm going to read this again. Writing down the words that Erich speaks from Baba's gestures does not get the real sense because, first, Erich is translating from a language, Baba's sign, means Baba's sign language, which is complete in itself. And second, because Baba gradually develops his discourse over a series of sessions. During the first session, he only intimates his subject. So one has to try and grasp the ideas clearly and then find English words to express them. So there, Francis, a master writer, was explaining how Baba brought messages to birth that were then signed by Meher Baba. And I strongly suspect that Chanji and others, had they really written their accounts of how Baba's message were dictated, would be talking in these same kinds of terms. Okay, well, why don't I stop there and pass it back to Cassandra.
Thank you, Ward. Very clear. I appreciate it. All right, guys, let's have Greg and unmute and Christina unmute. And let me find, where is Richard? There you are, unmute. So what do you guys think? Do you want like 5 or 8 minutes, let's say? Would that be enough for you to talk about?
Yeah, sure. That's enough for me.
Okay. Greg, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I would have to disagree with you, Ward, in regard to books published during Meher Baba's lifetime to which he put his name. I think really he was putting his approval to that version, and that he was completely cognizant of everything you've just said, and would expect in future that people would be having this conversation as we're having now. I mean, you'd have to be stupid to not be able to put this together, you know, that he was gesturing. And so I think it was, to me, it seems all very obvious that he was in support of versions that have the meaning, that have the point. And he was clear in saying, well, he messed it all up. You know, that version is messed up. He just simply put his signature on the approval of a version. So I don't consider stuff that has come about that way as being exactly Meher Baba's words. And I think it's a rabbit hole in my experience in Zoom meetings that are reading and discussion meetings. I do not allow that rabbit hole. We just don't go down that rabbit hole because for every reason I just said. So a question that I have is, what about if someone were to say, look online at the original notebooks and say, yeah, I've read the trust policy. That's all good and fine. I'm not looking to make a new edition. I'm just looking to kind of, you know, tweak with the words that are in those original notebooks and come up with something that is just a little bit easier to penetrate, but is like pretty much exactly what's written there. You know, no changes to sentences. We're dealing with some of those parentheses, maybe, you know, making it a little longer, something like that. But, you know, basically nothing contextual, nothing like those 3 points, you know, nothing exhaustive, no effort, nothing to do with that. Just, you know, helping. And what happens to some document like that? Can somebody publish that? Then I'll also say, I guess I'm still on the clock. What's happened in my understanding of all of this topic is incomprehension. If you're not going to try and comprehend, none of this really matters. I mean, it's all about, you know, when you're trying to comprehend. If you are in doubt, then your comprehension will falter, or you won't have faith in your comprehension. And I think that, you know, people who are really interested can do their own research. Like they can read this book, look at the original text, and, you know, do as much research as they want on their own. In Zoom meetings that are about comprehension that I'm involved in, you know, occasionally we will look at the source document and go, oh, well, I don't even understand what that means. So good that we have this book here. And then in other places we go, wow, so much simpler in the source document. Okay, so the source document is just another form of wanting to comprehend. And, you know, if anyone's slavish on a particular edition or version for comprehension, you know, just be aware. So there you go. My question still stands.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Would that be okay? So, you know, Meher Baba came for everyone, right? And don't you think that everyone has their own level of comprehension?
That goes without saying.
Yeah. So if you read to comprehend what you're capable of comprehending, then perhaps you don't need to go to a different version. I mean, I don't understand the point of you saying that it has to, of course it has to be comprehended, right?
Say it again. I didn't understand I couldn't hear your last sentence.
Of course these things have to be comprehended, but that's something different for everybody. I mean, we're all at different levels and different levels of interest. But Baba said these things for everybody, not just those who are going to take a scholarly approach.
I don't understand how that relates to what I said. What I was saying is if someone wants to comprehend. They want to comprehend. I mean, if you read a comic book and you go, hey, I get it, and you don't, and that's fine for you, then hey, that's fine for you. But for someone who is wanting to comprehend and wants access to what they can.
You're talking about comprehension like a static thing. I'm sorry, it just feels that way to me. You know, I think if I say that I comprehend something, that's my personal assessment, and it's reasonable.
And yeah, and
so that's what I'm saying. My point is that comprehension is different for everyone.
I agree.
I do think that people try to read for comprehension as best they can. I think the need for Baba's words goes a little bit deeper than comprehension. I think it's the one.
Okay, I would say that what I notice in Zoom meetings that are about reading and discussion is that people come into comprehension bringing along with them a truckload of previous stuff, symbolism, interpretation, actual words from text or hearsay that is not in that book, whatever book it is that is being read and discussed. And in the meetings that I'm part of where I have a say, I am adamant, no, we're going to put everything that we think about, that we know about, you know,
I see.
like Jesus's cross and how that relates to what we're reading. You know, it's like, let's put all that aside. You know, that's your own personal database there, and you know, it's good. It's just fine.
Yeah,
and
that does turn into a lot of debate. Yeah,
we're just comprehending the text in the book. The text in the book. So if you're just comprehending the text in the book, a sentence may go like, what? And then you would want to have access to other things to help you comprehend.
Thank you. What was your question again that you wanted to
about whether somebody who reads, say, the original source document for Infinite Intelligence, let's just say, the one that's called the Intelligence Notebooks. There's other source material that it relates, and it's, you know, all been exhaustively addressed. But let's say somebody just goes like, hey, I just want to do that. I just want to do that, you know, like fun thing. And they come up with a document that is pretty much the same words, maybe a little, you know, unpacking of some of those nested parentheses. And what do they do with it? Let's say they say, hey, trust, I want to give this to you. Or can they just publish it themselves?
You want to respond more, or?
Yeah. Okay. If someone, you know, wants to go back to the original sources like you're talking about, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I would hope people that would do that. There's no reason not to do that at all. That's part of a deeper engagement with the material itself. That's part of the reason that all that stuff has been put up there on the line. When it comes to, you know, the actual, you know, publishing of something like that, okay, there's going to need to be a distinction between an actual edition and somebody's gloss or interpretation or something like that. There's nothing wrong with interpretations and renderings, but they aren't the same thing as editions. And editions have to, by trust policy, measure up to a real standard where there's severe limitations on the subjectivity, the editor's subjectivity. For example, when Marilyn and I were working in Infinite Intelligence, we went over and over and over things to do the best we could to get our own subjective points of view out of it. Now, when somebody is exploring the book on their own, there's no reason why they have to be under that limitation at all. They can be as subjective as they want. They can give any kind of interpretation that they want. I would say that that is actively a good thing, because that means that people are really and truly trying to internalize what Baba gave out. But I would say that's not the same thing as an edition. we're talking about entering into the domain of commentary, say. That's what it was called in the past. There were some of the greatest philosophical works in the history. All right, I'm a great fan of Shankaracharya. I just love the guy. He was apparently minor incarnation. He's one of the most beautiful writers I've ever read in my whole life. Well, his whole work is commentary. He'll take the Brahma Sutra, take 4 words, and the next 10 pages are his commentary. And this may be the greatest, some of the greatest philosophy ever written. There's no reason not to do that. There's absolutely no reason at all. His work is called the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Bhashya means commentary. So no one has no doubt that it's the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. It's not the Brahma Sutra. So I would just draw that distinction has to be kept in place so that when people read things, they can have some confidence if it's being presented as an edition, that it has tried to meet some of these standards of objectivity and other things like that.
And Greg?
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so Ward, you're giving a very specific meaning to this term edition, and it seems that it's a sort of blessing or designation that the Trust Publications Group would be putting on the work. Is that correct?
Yeah, critical edition is the technical term used in textual studies. Yeah,
but I mean, there's a different cat. You sort of went from the critical edition to a commentary, and I think Christina's question had more to do with when you and Merwan worked with the intelligence notebooks, you came up with a rendering of it as infinite intelligence. And I think her question was more, what if somebody comes up with a different rendering? It's not a commentary, it's just a different sort of presentation of the material that they found in the intelligence notebooks. So can you just address that case specifically, and what would be the legal issues
Determined
there?
in court.
yeah. Well, I mean, as far as the whole legal end of it, one hopes that these questions, don't have to go in that direction. But I mean, it is a copyright thing where Baba gave copyrights to the trust, and the trust is the owner of that intellectual property. The thing is that I do think, I mean, in a way, it's the way it's branded or the way it's styled. If something is presented, let's say, as an interpretation, something like that, that to me is something quite different than an edition, and that's not a critical edition, and that's not a line I would be willing to blur, because the course of doing a critical edition, it really gets put to a very rigorous standard. Like I mentioned, the study of all source materials. This took me 7 or 8 years with the Tiffin Lectures to find it all, and all of them are brought to bear on all of the relevant passages. So if somebody comes up with a version that doesn't do that, it's not the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be able to do it, but it should not be styled as an edition. It should be styled as something else. That's
that
the
third point on that list, complete transparency.
Yeah.
Should carry forward.
Yeah.
In non-editions.
So what the trust has the copyright to, presumably, they have the copyright to the intelligence notebooks, and certainly they have the copyright to infinite intelligence. But suppose somebody works with the intelligence notebooks and comes up with a different rendering of that.
Well, I mean, that would need the copyright holder's permission to republish it. It's like if you wrote a novel and somebody took it and reworked it and wanted to republish it, they would need your permission to do so. And again, to me, if I don't have any, actually, I want to repeat, I think that if people are really engaging the primary sources there and really exploring it for their own part and digging to the depths of themselves and the depths of Baba's words to understand it, that is a positive good. That is a very good thing to happen. But what to me does matter is that it not be characterized as an addition. It is something other than that. That matters. You know, I maybe at some point, I came up with some, you see, here's one of the things that people are concerned about, and I am also, and that is that in the course of editing, coming up with so-called editions of Baba's words, they completely rewrite it in light of what they want it to be. And when it really does distort the original things that Baba said, this is an obvious problem, an obvious danger. I mean, we talk so much, there's been so much talk, I think a lot of it inaccurate and misleading, frankly, but about, you know, scripture having gotten revised by priests and other interested persons who turn it into something that they wanted to be rather than what it was originally came to them as. Well, that's a danger. And part of this editorial policy is to put real limits on that. So if it's an interpretation, or I don't know what the words would be, if it was a version, if it's characterized accurately, I think it's a good thing. But it's not an addition unless it meets these standards the trust really has put in place.
Well, the question, of course, is when do you need to get copyright reprint approval and when not? When can you just do your thing? And when do you need to have the approval to do your thing?
Yeah, it would seem to me, if I can chime in.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I'm just going to call you.
If it's if you're calling it Infinite Intelligence by Meher Baba, that's an addition. If you're calling it My Interpretation of the Infinite Intelligent Notebooks, then that would not be an addition.
Right.
Correct.
Right, I agree.
So the question remains about when you need to get permission and when you don't to publish.
Well, I don't know. Do we really? I mean, this is a whole copyright issue. I mean, the trust owns the copyright to the source material. And I mean, I imagine if somebody is doing a version of it, they would probably need to go to the copyright holder in the same way that if you were doing a version of a novel, let's say as a screenplay, you would have to go to the novelist as copyright holder. This is all a big legal question. I hope we don't spend our time on this, but it's dealt with under copyright law. It would be under copyright law.
But there
Indian
sense.
Well, American.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
isn't there a sense in which that you're saying that you can't call them Meher Baba's words? You can't say written by Meher Baba.
Right. You could say, this is what I understand Meher Baba to be saying. This is my rendering of what Meher Baba said. If it's honest and clear, I don't see myself that there is a problem.
Yeah.
And as I say, I think it's actively a good for people to be doing this. It means they're really trying to engage and internalize what Baba is saying. And, the fact that something is not an addition does not, I mean, I mentioned my hero, Shankaracharya, or Ibn Arabi is another one. But like the Brahma Sutra Bhashya has been characterized by many as the greatest work of philosophy in the whole world. And it's a commentary. And its influence is incalculable. So there's no reason why your interpretations can't be likewise.
Rich, did you have more you wanted to say?
Yeah, there's a few things I've been thinking in preparation for tonight. First of all, I just have to say, Ward, I'm once again blown away and really impressed by the presentation that you gave, and it's insightful and interesting and inspiring. So thank you. But I am not particularly literary, and so these issues aren't so important to me. But Baba's words have always been important since I've come to Baba, and the key to my coming to Baba. And I continue to work with Baba's words, and I lead discourse meetings. And for me, I think, Baba says understanding has no meaning, but it's still important for us to try to understand what he's writing. But Baba's words, I think, what I notice in discourse meetings and for myself, have a life of their own, a power to them, and they carry with them Baba's presence. And so often readings, Baba's discourses and other books inspires people and makes them feel in some way Baba present with them. And I think is really the most important thing about Baba's words, or that they bring him to people. And the other, I think the other thing that's also important for people who are searching for God within is that he gives the concepts of what God is in a modern day mind. And for someone searching for God within, they're like a map or signposts as to what to look for. And in that sense, it's important to understand what those concepts are. And, you know, I was thinking about that Baba was silent. His mandali were his voice. And that shows up, as you mentioned, Ward, in the Louis Van Gasteren's movie, where Erich is interpreting Baba. You probably know, and, you know, Baba is gesturing something along these lines, like, you know, keep going, keep going. And it's, Baba is not doing signs. He's just, because Erich knows what Baba wants to say. And then at one point, Erich said something and Baba indicates no, and Erich says, oh, Baba says that's not right. And then he goes through some gesturing to get the right word. And I also think the different Mandali's voices show up in different books. For example, the discourses have a particular style, particular voice. And it starts with Deshmukh, and then it's been edited by different people, eventually Don Stevens. The Everything and Nothing has a particular voice, and that was put together by Francis Brabazon. Life at its Best and the Beams have a different tone to them, and that was put together by Merwan Jessawala. So it seems that the voice largely depends upon who the Mandali members were that were involved in its creation. And the last thing I wanted to say was dealing with Baba's use of language and silence. And we're living in an age where language is going through a transition. And I'm involved with had been involved with technology, computers, and so on. And first, people see that Baba's alphabet board is a lot like texting. That's one indication of technology in a way. But more important, language is transforming because language is used to create computer programs. So programs are made out of English and mathematics. And so English is being used to control machines, and language is being used to control machines. And likewise, now machines can speak and they can understand, and we're entering into a new way in which language is being used. And even web pages, HTML, words are no longer just words, they are links. So a word stands for something, you click on it and it opens up a whole larger context. So, and language is being amplified. One person can put out a tweet and it can go around the world within 5 minutes. So, it's being amplified through technology. So we're going through this major transition. And it seemed that Baba chose, or anticipated, however, or created everything of this transition. But anyway, he is silent and in this transition. And I think it also has a lot to do with the transition from reason to intuition, where reason is largely, let's say, language-based, and intuition is more perhaps heartfelt and intuitive, not needing as much mental reasoning and thinking in order to grasp it. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
I thought in view of some of the things that have come up, maybe I have a little thing I developed to illustrate the hazards of editing. Would you guys begin my reading this? These are the sorts of problems that could come up, okay? And I invented these cases.
Ward, before you do that,
Yeah.
I wonder if we could give Greg a chance to get in here. He hasn't really.
Oh, Greg, yeah.
Yeah, let's have him, and then we'll do that.
Okay, well, I do look forward to hearing that more.
Yeah.
So don't forget it.
I won't let him forget it.
So in terms of the handling of the unpublished stuff, in general, I'm just really thrilled at the way that the Trust Publications Committee has been handling it and the way Ward goes about the job. I mean, he's amazingly and uniquely equipped to do that job. And in particular, the fact that the source materials for things are available. You know, I can go right to the intelligence notebooks. They're all online. I think that's wonderful. I think the essay that Ward, that you included in the in Infinite Intelligence about the process that you used for it to come into being, you know, some people will find that very tedious. But I think it's a really remarkable and important example of the kind of transparency that really, really makes a difference. And so I think all of that is wonderful. I don't, you know, Ward knows that I kind of had maybe a slightly different take on the rendering of the notebooks into Infinite Intelligence. For my taste, there's a little, it's not that there's too much repetition specifically, it's just sort of the way in which the repetition occurs, I found quite aggravating. But when I pushed through it, and I ended up spending a great deal of time with that work, including doing rewrites of the first 6 series, trying to address that problem that I perceived of the excessive and unhelpful repetition. And I certainly understand Baba's use of repetition in God Speaks, and certainly in an oral presentation, it would make sense to do much more of it. My feeling is that in a book, you know, I can reread the book, I can reread parts of the book, I can control the repetition myself however I want to. So I don't like to be forced to endure it when I don't need it. But anyway, so I would like to see, you know, some room for someone else to come in and do maybe I mean, really, I think that the approach that Ward and Merwan took, it was conservative in that regard, that the amount of change that they made from the intelligence notebooks to what became the Infinite Intelligence, they were conservative in how they did it. And, you know, I can appreciate the wisdom of that. And my approach probably would have been less conservative, and that might have yielded some good things. It probably would have also created some big problems. So there it is. But as far as, but really my focus in the last few years has been more on the published works, because they didn't all come into being by the same processes. And this all started because for whatever reason, I started reading a lot of Don Stevens stuff. And his preoccupations in his later years, one of the big ones was the integrity of Baba's words. And that had all started when he, you know, made a comment to Baba that the young people that he was involved with didn't think it was important even to read, you know, Baba's stuff. And that wasn't so much that they doubted the authenticity of the words. That was more the sort of devaluing of the head versus the heart. The spiritual path was all about the heart, so you didn't have to study anything, you didn't need to do anything. So that's kind of how it got started. But then in the process, Baba told Don, number one, to tell all these young people that it was extremely important that they read his words and study them. And secondly, he specifically talked about the ones that came into being by that carefully vetted process. in which, Baba gave the points to Amandali, it was written up, but then Baba went over it word for word and gave it his very specific imprimatur. And, Baba told Dunn that there was, he attached an atom bomb of spiritual significance to these and so forth. And I don't obsess over the atom bomb, but I do like to know that I do like to know the process by which various works came into being. So, and Dunn had sort of addressed that, but it was all over the place. And every time somebody asked me about it, or every time the subject came up, I couldn't remember where to find it, and I would have to dig through Dunn's stuff. And so finally, I did an article a number of months ago where I went back through all of the Dunn stuff. I got all of his comments about it. There was a lot of discussion between him and Bao about the process by which things came into being, and so I got into that. And I sort of put it all together in one article, and then I sort of expanded what Dunn had done to address works that had come into being since he dropped his body, things like the works that Ward has been working on.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was very helpful. It's very helpful to know there's a sort of core set of things that we have very, very good verification that Baba was intimately involved in the exact form in which they came out. And so for me, it's very helpful to know what those things are. You can kind of get a grounding in those works, and then you can sort of go out from there into the other works that maybe didn't have quite so rigorous an involvement by Baba. But because you have that grounding in that core set, you've developed a kind of radar about it that I think helps you not to be vulnerable to things that really are misstatements of what Baba said. So anyway, that's probably enough.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Great.
So Christina said she has one other thing she wanted to mention, or one other comment, and then where you can do your little spiel, and then we'll open it up to more people. Okay, Christina?
I have another comment because of what Greg said, so thank you, Greg. And that is regarding God Speaks and the reading of. I remember when Meher Baba was alive and God Speaks was printed, and it was like the thing to read. You better read it. If you didn't read it, there was no like little club of people who weren't reading God Speaks and could feel that they were standing on solid ground and had an angle for why they didn't read God Speaks. Like, no, you read God Speaks. And that's what the reading meetings were. God Speaks or discourses. That was it. And there was one going on in every little town that had Baba people in it every week. It was only after Meher Baba passed that people started coming, and there was not that sense of, you got to read that book. You got to read these two books. And I think it was because not all the Mandali had read them. Certainly the women, I don't even know, but I'm assuming they were never asked, required to read God Speaks, none of them. And then maybe, like Erich was so involved with God Speaks, and to the exclusion of the other, many of the other Mandali, and I don't think they were required to read it. So there wasn't a sense of like, yeah, you got to read it. Like there was for those people who were connected with the groups when Meher Baba was alive. And so I observed the whole phenomenon of this bogus, did I say that? This idea that, well, we don't need to read that. We don't need to read that. That was the fabrication of some people. I don't even know who they are, but it was a fabrication. That was never the case in Meher Baba's life. That I observed. There was no one would have had, if anyone said that, people would look at them like that person was from, I don't know, an institution and they escaped. Anyway, that's my comment on that.
Thank you, Christina.
If I can just make one short comment in response to that, Cassandra, it reminds me of the situation with the discourses on meditation, where Baba gave these discourses, but eventually clarified that they were really for later.
After he died, yeah.
Right, and the same reason, you know, if you're Erich and you're with Baba day in and day out for decades, probably you've absorbed what needs to be absorbed from God Speaks, and you don't need to do it. So it depends on who you are and where you stand in relation to Baba.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. Well, you know, I think we see from this discussion that this is a vast topic, and there are so many facets to it that I sincerely hope that people will continue having these kinds of discussions and feel that you can speak up about it. Ward, you wanted to present one more thing?
Yeah.
Greg
This
said
is,
remind you. So.
yes. This is, I wrote an article a bunch of years ago, and I drafted this to illustrate something that is really obvious, but I think it's good to put it on the table. That is the kinds of, one of the reasons why there do need to be real editorial standards in the production of editions of Baba's words, because of the danger of editors completely reconstructing things that Baba has said in view of what they want him to have said. You know, this is a perennial issue. But okay, so I came up with this example. Let's see if I can do it. Yeah. All right. Did that come up? Why?
Yep.
From Mir? Okay. I took this example, and listen, please, let's not get, I drew up a red button issue, abortion, right? So let's not fight about abortion. But I tried to give 3 examples to illustrate why we don't want people rewriting Baba's words. So, okay, I had, in this article, I had 3 editors. Each editor finds himself confronted with the following passage, which I quote from the 7th edition. You could take the 6th if you want. Okay, so here's the original passage. From the spiritual point of view, birth control must essentially be effected through mental control and nothing else. Physical means are under no circumstances advisable, even when partners seek to use them merely as provisional and secondary aid without intending to ignore the ideal of developing mental control. Okay, look, I know lots of people could say lots of things about this. Let's not get into the issue of abortion itself. I'm talking here about the dangers of editing. So here's editor, my one editor. Okay, this is my editor A. My editor A is a right-to-life person who thinks that abortion is murder. Okay, so this editor has rewritten it. Okay, now editor A wants to, this is my comment, wants to accentuate what is to him a clear implication of this passage. Abortion obviously qualifies as a form of birth control. It follows that the avatar in this discourse is condemning abortion. Moreover, A feels keenly the injustice that abortion perpetrates on unborn children and sees no reason why not to include a hint of this into the text of Baba's words. His edited version of the discourse then incorporates a few small emendations. Okay, here is my emended text by editor A. From the spiritual point of view, birth control must always be effected through mental control and nothing else. Physical means, including abortion, which indeed kills an innocent child, is absolutely impermissible, even when the parents seek to use such means merely as provisional and secondary aids, etc. Okay, obviously this is stuck in a clause about mentioning abortion and saying that abortion murders a child. So this is editor A's reworking of this passage. Now let's take a person who is, works for Planned Parenthood and is a strong supporter of choice and all that kind of thing. Editor B, by contrast, believes that Meher Baba, humane and compassionate, understands human weakness and would not set so high a bar and impose so impossible a standard on the world at large. We know of instances in which Baba told lovers of his to use contraception. Ought not the discourse to give a more balanced perspective on what Baba's position on this subject was over the course of his lifetime? Editor B thinks so, and he proceeds to revise accordingly. And so this is this editor's version. From the spiritual point of view, it is better that birth control be effected through mental control. When they can, partners should avoid physical means. And when they use them merely as provisional and secondary aids without intending to ignore the hazard of developing mental control, they should be aware of the hazards they are incurring. So you see the difference in this version of it. It's just sort of good advice to avoid birth control, but it's not a rule. Okay, my point in bringing this up is that neither A nor B is an acceptable edition of Baba's words. Both of them have rewritten them according to their own beliefs. Now, I know there are going to be lots of different opinions on birth control, and I don't want to get off into that. But do we want this being done with Baba's words in the name of coming up with new editions of Baba's words? I would say clearly no. And that is an example of why there really do need to be some objective standards so far as this goes. So when Baba told Francis Brabazon to rewrite God Speaks without changing the facts, well, you can, if you're rigorous about it, fairly objectively identify the truth conditions of an utterance and reproduce those without altering them. And that's one reason why editions need to be editions. They need to actually be editions of Baba's words without people revising them into what they want them to be. This is a perennial hazard afflicting the words of the God-man. And this is one of the reasons for the Trust's editorial policy, that this sort of thing won't happen. Now, what's to keep it from happening? I'm going to say this too. The main thing is it has to be checks and controls. That is to say, it has to be transparent, and Baba lovers around the world who feel that an edition has screwed up and gotten off target in this respect should say so. So I feel the greater community of Baba's lovers play a most indispensable role in this process in using their voices and saying what they think about these things. Okay, so there's an illustration of the hazards of editing.
All right, thank you, Ward. So I know you're waiting, Christina, but I want to give other people in the audience a chance to get involved, and I'll come back to you as soon as I can. So if anybody has a question or comment that they would like to participate in this discussion with, please raise your hand. Think about it. Christina, why don't you make your comment while we're waiting?
Well, it was along what you just said, Ward. That version B, that was the version of discourses I utilized when I was in my 20s. I mean, you know, everyone's gonna do their own editing in their own head for their own purposes at any time, you know.
And it's personal. Mahu.
Thank you, Ward, and everybody else. And just you opened a good subject, actually. I had no idea. But my question is there any, I mean, have we heard that there's a possible a new addition to Baba's original work or Baba's books? Or Ward, are you just opening this discussion for perhaps the future upcoming, if it's so, if it happens? Because I know about the editorial committee in Trust, because you know, there needed to be someone wanted to translate Infinite Intelligence into Farsi, Persian, and we contacted the Trust office, and they referred us to the editorial committee, and everything was followed. Of course, there's always a procedure and policy and protocol to follow. And we trust that because Baba said that in the trust and will, you know, in that documentation. So for me, no question asked. I mean, I just follow what is stated by him and whomever is working for him in that position and in that caliber. You know, and not everybody can do, for example, Ward, what you're doing. I know I can't, or maybe Nashwan or Don Stevens or whatnot, but you know, and edition, yes, has its flavor in there, mixed a little bit, but I like to acknowledge, Ward, attending to your seminars. I haven't seen that elsewhere because particularly I like the fact that when you're presenting Baba's words, the distinction is there. You say, well, this is what I think he is saying. This is my opinion, and this is Baba's words. My opinion, Baba's word. This is very, very important. And in fact, I learned that in your seminar, that we have a responsibility when we are, you know, blurting or talking about Baba's words. We need to say that this is our interpretation of Baba's words in discourses. This is our interpretation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Maho. It's a very good point. So I don't see any hands for questions, but if people want to come, Ron, go ahead. Ron Greenspan.
I had to unmute.
Yeah.
Okay. I really liked when Ward was talking about the difference between what gets settled on as far as what Baba's words were, as far as best could be received from the modely that were interpreting Baba's gestures and all that, and then decided upon for the edition. But then that's just the beginning of it all for Baba lovers, I think. It goes on where, in fact, we spend our time, a certain amount of time, as we are inspired to do, with those words. We're spending our days, moment to moment, trying to live up to those words as we best can understand them, which is a growing process. But then what we can do, and Baba seems to want us to come together and like Richie was saying, have a discourse meeting, and then maybe read something from a discourse, or just read one of Baba's messages, or anything, a quote, a saying, and then be able to say what we think about it. Because once Baba's brother, Adi Jr., sent Baba a letter asking what should we do in our meetings? What are your recommendations? And Baba played down the idea of reading his words or anybody else's words. It wasn't about reading so much, but first and foremost, he wanted us to share our thoughts about Baba in all aspects, I would imagine. So I think this is what we really have to be enjoying, is that growth process and sharing process with one another, using Baba's words as our inspiration for our daily lives.
Thank you, Ron. Good points. Joy Carlson, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw it flicker by.
I think Richard hand is up.
No, I didn't.
Okay. Yeah, Richard's next. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, so Ward, here's my question. I think what you're outlining works really well as long as the editions are being done in English. What does the trust have in mind for foreign language translations in which there isn't necessarily the expertise with people on the trust?
I know that's a million-dollar question. Actually, we just had a meeting with our little publication group yesterday where that came up a lot. And all I can say is I'm glad it's not my job. It's a challenge of huge dimensions, and it's going to just have to get worked out. I personally think that different language groups would be good for there to be core groups who work with each other in like Telugu or, you know, Chinese or Spanish or all these things, and they'll gradually work it all out. But there is no easy solution to this problem at all. It's historically one of the great ones. I think one of the greatest labors of translation ever done in the history of the world was the translation of the Buddhist sutras into Chinese. I think that was a intellectual accomplishment of spectacular dimensions. And it's just going to have to get done by people with that ability. We're just at the beginning with this whole problem. I stepped out of it because I just saw that it was way beyond me. Yeah, no, it's going to take people who really know these languages too, because people will say, well, in German, we don't have a word for mind, or in French, we don't have a word for consciousness, or, you know, the particularities of individual languages create all sorts of translation problems, and you need people who are masters of Baba's discourse and masters of these languages, who are highly accomplished writers, to solve these problems.
Well, I do think that having it in English is a good reference point, and that reference point in English will be available to anyone who wants to tackle the translation. We see all the time translations that are really sloppy. And, you know, poets and everything else. So we have the facility.
Baba does seem to have picked English as his language, whether we like it or not. In fact, I heard that in the last years, even at Merazad, he was requiring them all to speak in English. It wasn't that way at the beginning, but it became that way more and more as time went on. That's not to say English is the best language. I don't think it is, as a matter of fact. But it's the language Baba seems to have picked.
Go ahead, Greg.
Well, so during Baba's lifetime, he put Dunn in charge of the translations. And Dunn, you know, he certainly was fluent, I think, in French, or fluent enough to take that one. I think he was pretty good in Spanish. Somebody can correct me if you know differently. But then at some point he definitely went, you know, beyond language that I think he was personally conversant with, and still act as the overseer of those translations, you know, under Baba's direction. So there's one model, at least, where Baba seemed to think that it was a good idea to have one person who I guess was trusted with protecting the, you know, the general meaning of the words, and then who in turn worked with people who had more expertise in the specific languages.
Yeah, I think as Baba gave Dunn the charge, I think, of French, Spanish, and German, those three languages. And in the 1990s, we had major meetings between the Trust and Dunn and his group. About 10 of them came over to work out questions of translation. So there have been these various arrangements worked out. There's someone who's in charge of the Indian languages, for example. And I don't think anything has been worked out for Chinese. There's a lot happening in Tamil also. The problem, yeah, it would be very good to have people sort of overseeing all of this, but man, it is such a job that, Lordy, it's a killer. Needs to be done.
But you need Baba there to appoint somebody.
Any
If
other
Baba appointed
question?
someone, it's like a death sentence. If Baba appointed me, I would jump off a bridge.
Run for the hills, yeah.
But he would
Yeah.
arrange to have a cart with a mattress in it going underneath where you jumped off so that you would have a nice soft landing.
A cart with a soft mattress and a stack of books to be translated. I would land right in the middle of the job. Yeah. No, this is a huge question. It's coming up right now again.
So just so some people know, it may be difficult for me to see you if you don't use the electronic raise hand button under reactions. So please use that if you can. I don't have visual sight of everyone. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just wondering, since Baba was using gestures, that in future translations in other languages, if those gestures might kind of add energy or meaning to the translations that could be done in those different languages, and that people who are doing the translations might gain additional meaning by watching the videos of whatever it is they're translating. Since he used movement so much, and of course they wouldn't be there because it's removed by time. But you know, if Baba imbued all of what he did and said and everything with energy, I'm wondering if there's some conveyance in that way.
Yeah. Well, you know, various ones of you have been bringing up what I think of in various aspects of ways of engaging Baba's words. Like Ron was talking about that. We have Baba's words. Well, how do we actually work with them among each other? And I think that is completely the right way to go. I'm a total supporter of all of that. So when we're talking about editions of Baba's words, that is not the end of the story at all. That's only the beginning point. And as a matter of fact, like Elizabeth, what you're talking about, it may sound a bit kooky at present, but I don't think it's really kooky at all. I think that if you had groups of people, I think probably the best way to go with Baba's words, all right, I'll say a very good way to go, maybe other people would have other opinions, is for groups of people to be engaging Baba's words in all kinds of different ways through a group process. You know, when I was a professor, my field of specialization was oral tradition, actually, or oral tradition and literacy, the interfaces of those two. And a basic fact of human civilization is through most of time, very few people have read. Only a very small minority have been readers. And I think that's the natural condition of the human race. I think we're going back to that. There are always going to be some people who read, but many people, and I would even put myself in this category, I prefer listening more than reading, as a matter of fact. So I actually think the group engagement in all sorts of ways is a marvelous way of deeply internalizing Baba's words. And I think if we could have people, we can have a reincarnated Mani who can come along and do all the gestures. You know how marvelous she was with that. I think that's fantastic. Videos, audio books, every kind of medium like that is completely a good thing to do.
So Nashwan, I wonder if you have anything you want to comment on here, and we'd love to hear from you.
I have a lot to say, and it would cut into Rod's time. But while I've been listening to it from a very academic standpoint, I had the grace and the good fortune to be in Baba's presence several times. And in 1965, Baba actually gave me a discourse while I was sitting in his presence on the subject of conviction. And that was in relation to a question that I had asked. So I won't narrate the whole story just now because we are running out of time, but I did want to mention about one incident that happened at my last meeting with Meher Baba in 1968 when Dara and Amrit got married. On that day, I was sitting on Baba's bed, and Irich was also sitting nearby. Baba was lying on the bed, and the others over there were my uncle Ilcha Mistry, Jimmy Mistry, Francis Brabazon, and Pendu. And Irich asked me if I wanted to massage Baba's legs. So I sat and massaged Baba's legs. The purpose of this meeting was to decide my future employment. So a number of questions were asked, and I was selected for 3 jobs in the Army, and the Air Force, and the Times of India, and Baba asked salaries and so forth. The salary at the Air Force was the highest, the Army was less than that, and the job of a journalist was the lowest salary. So Baba turned to me, and so all this was brought up, and then Baba turned to each one of the mandlis sitting there. And he asked my uncle, Ilcha Mistry, he says, so which one do you think Naushirwan should join? So he said, well, he has always been, he started the Glow, and he's been a journalist, he's been a freelancer, perhaps Times of India. Then he turned to Pendu, and Pendu said, Baba, when we were in Dehradun, he used to go around with this wooden rifle in his hand, so perhaps he should join the army. And Jimmy Mistry was not asked. And Francis said something which I couldn't understand what he said. So I knew this was coming. So Baba turned to me and said, what would you want to do? And I said, Baba, whatever you say, I will do that. I will join that organization. And this is very significant. So Baba said, okay, join the Times of India as a journalist. And then he was very sick at that time. He was lying down, and he moved his fingers very gently. And Irich said, now don't change your mind. And Baba said, no, that's not what he was saying. Then somebody else from the Mandli said, don't get second thoughts. No, that's not what I said. And then Baba very slowly, alphabet by alphabet, went over it and said, do not vacillate. Now, the suggestions that the others had made could translate to do not vacillate, but Baba wanted to be accurate and exact. And when I started the Globe, that's what I decided, that I would not change Baba's words for the world. I would stick to them. And I know I'm Ward Parks's nightmare in that sense, but I stick to Baba's words as much as I possibly can in the Glow. And I sometimes don't even change the grammatical part of it. I just leave it exactly the way it is. Now, in the next issue of the Glow, you will see there are quite a few things that were discourses that were taken from what we have in beloved archives, but they were corrected in Tiffin Lectures. So I've used the corrected version. Now, again, in the next issue, you're going to see something very, very surprising. A whole set of messages given by Meher Baba to Paul Brunton that have never been published before. and I obtained them from his archives. So it's very interesting because when the archives sent me the discourses, not discourses, but the messages that Baba gave to Paul Brunton, along with that, they sent me Baba's words from Perfect Master, Baba's works from Meher Baba Journal. Fortunately for me, it was mentioned that from the Meher Baba Journal or from, so all these copyright, I've been dealing with copyright issues from day one. For years and years, I've been dealing with it. In fact, I was so frustrated with Jack Small that I went to Erich and I told him, I said, Jack is giving me a hard time. He says, next time he gives you a hard time, tell him to go and copyright the Bible first. He just jocularly said that. But even with Adi and with others, I've always had copyright issues. But I have, by Baba's grace, in Beloved Archives, we have a very, very large number of discourses of Baba. In fact, Tiffin Lectures were given to me by Errico Nadel way before they were published by the Trust. But I never used them because there were lots of gaps in them. So while I have lots of Baba's words and I keep using them from time to time, I try and keep the purity of Meher Baba's words, because that's what he emphasized. And again, a point about the several books that have been published with Baba's. Baba did not approve of God to man and man to God. In fact, we have a complete set of correspondence in which several errors in that book have been pointed out based on Baba's words. So it was beautifully written, it flowed very well, but same thing with the book of discourses called Silent Revelations of Meher Baba. That was entirely something that was put together by Jean Adriel and I'm forgetting the other gentleman.
Markey.
Alexander Markey. So the same thing happened with Deshmukh's book, 5 volumes. So, so when these books were finally edited, all that was kept in mind, how sincere the writings were to Baba's words. And the question of repetition is that when Baba gave these discourses, he would always recap it the next day. So that's why you find these repetitions over and over again. And that's one of the reasons. There are lots of things about Baba's discourses because and he was very, very certain as to what he was trying to convey. And that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Shawan. Well, we've got a lot of really good voices here tonight. Christina, did you have something quickly? We're kind of late here. Did you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shawan. Very much appreciate your perspective. Very much. Regarding repetition, say for infinite intelligence, let's just say repetition. You know, whenever I'm reading that book with others and discussing with others, I think it and sometimes even say it. I try to say it as often as I can, that an imagination of the event is helpful. I imagine the event at which these words are happening. And I imagine, what would it be like for me if I was sitting there and like somebody's writing on a blackboard and then somebody else is copying it down and then speaking it out and maybe a correction or something like this. And, you know, most of the time I would probably be going like this. I mean, I would like not know, and it would require repetition. I mean, the imagination that everyone who was sitting there was going, why, yes, why, of course, that makes perfect sense. I think that's a fantasy that's not real. I think most of the people who were sitting there were like, different languages, different ability to like understand, like Cassandra, you said, like, different comprehensibility limits, whatever. And this repetition was, yeah, I'm narcissistic enough to think that Meher Baba was dictating it for me, but really he was dictating it for the people who were there. And
No, it was for me.
yeah, right.
Sorry.
It was for me too. But
I
really,
just want to say real quick, we read Infinite Intelligence together, and I think those of us in that group have read it a number of times, and still when we read it, we may go back and reread something because it does take
most
repetition
definitely
to really get to the depth.
Actually, I think that I very much agree with what you're saying about trying to put oneself into that original audience receiving these things. And I think that is particularly true for these materials from the 20s, because it may be true of later things also, could be. But in the 20s, Baba was really composing this material for live audiences that he was discoursing to. So I think Infinite Intelligence, Tiffin Lectures, and very much these talks to the Meher Ashram boys, very much that. The more you can imaginatively put yourself into that scene and become a direct recipient of Baba's own discoursing, the more you're going to get the power of it. That's something, again, where groups could be really a big help with this, if groups cultivate ways of encouraging that somehow.
Well, the other thing that I've
gotten comments from, I'm sorry.
The other thing
I've gotten comments from people in various groups about when they read them, they can't help but imagine what it looks like because they're that vivid for some things. Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah. The other thing was about, I see the core issue as copyright. I mean, I really do. I think that's the issue that will persist into the future as an issue. And I do think that, if I imagine a future where Meher Baba is relevant to a whole bunch of people, I don't see that future right now. I just don't. In this country. In India, I certainly do, and maybe China. But I'm not there. I'm here. So, this future of relevance, I don't know how that's going to happen, but really a method to get there would be in some form of simplification of these complicated books, these books that deal with complex topics. So I definitely see not only, it happening, but I see a need for it to happen. So I'm like eager for it to happen. That people say, well, I'm going to summarize all this. And
I thought you were working on the Cliff Notes to Infinite Intelligence.
It would be called the Cliff Notes. Yeah, it would be called the Cliff Notes.
Okay, Deborah Tyler, you've been waiting. Thank you. You need to unmute, hon. Can you unmute?
How's that?
There you go.
Is that good?
That's
Is there time? I think the time's up, right?
No, let's go ahead and
So I don't know. I just wanted to touch briefly on a couple of points. A lot of good things were said. I really appreciate what Richie said about and it's a tired old theme, and it's a tired old theme with me, which goes back to when I first heard about Meher Baba and the importance of the exactitude of the words that I read at the time, which happened to be in the Everything and the Nothing, and the exquisite syntax of the particular passage that I just accidentally read, which touched my brain and my consciousness in such a way that I knew Meher Baba was the avatar upon reading that. It was one of those things. So I've always had a feeling, not really an intellectual compulsion about it, about the fact that in this Advent, we have an avatar who did authorize and indicate what kinds of things he wanted to go out. We don't need to go over the whole process and the history of that. I think that Discourses, the 7th edition of the Discourses in 1987, was a turning point. And I know it generated a lot of controversy, and it had something to do with Don Stevens' interest in bringing this out years later, and others. So I don't know the answer. I also know that we're in a completely different age with computers and technology, and language has changed completely. I don't know what the world's going to look like in 20, 50 years. But I just think it's very important that to whatever extent we can preserve the absolute integrity of what we know the avatar said, and or what we know for a fact he authorized, I think it's vitally important that we do that. That's really all I have to say. And I really appreciate hearing everybody's very interesting thoughts. Thank you.
And there's one thing we know for sure that Baba said, and that is the prayer for the beloved's prayer. So please unmute yourselves and let's say the beloved prayer before I end the recording, and then we'll say goodnight. You've all been really, really patient and wonderful. Thank you so much. Beloved God,
help us all to love you more and more and more and more and still yet more, till we become worthy of union with you, and help us all to hold fast to Baba's Amen till the very end. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
thank you all. Let me stop the recording here. Very
When did he
good.
give that prayer?